A sharp scent of antiseptic filled the corridor as Virginia Crawford clutched her phone, heart racing. Nurses wheeled her mother toward emergency surgery, the beeping monitors echoing down the sterile hallway. She called Douglas again, 6th time in an hour. He finally picked up, his voice curt. "Mom's being rushed into surgery. I need you here." Silence. Then, coldly, "Can't make it. Big things happening. Just handle it yourself." The line went dead. Moments later, a text buzzed through. "Just sold the estate. Leaving for Brazil with someone who actually makes me happy." Virginia stared at her screen, the words blurring. Her bank account empty. Her marriage dead. But what Douglas didn't know was that Virginia had been documenting every lie, every theft, every betrayal. He had no idea what was coming next. Virginia Crawford had always carried herself with quiet strength. At 47, she was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Graceful, composed, and grounded in family values. She lived in Birmingham, Alabama, in a historic Victorian estate that had belonged to her family for 4 generations. Every stained glass panel told the story of her lineage. Her mother still occupied the East Wing, surrounded by memories and gardenias. After her father's passing 3 years ago, Virginia made it her mission to preserve the house and the legacy it held. Her marriage to Douglas had once been something she believed in. They met 15 years earlier at a charity gala downtown. He had been a young, ambitious junior partner at a law firm, handsome, attentive, and seemingly earnest. Virginia remembered how he'd laughed with her mother over gardening tips, how he'd lingered in the library asking questions about the home's history. For a time, they were a team, Sunday brunches in the garden, summer evenings with glasses of lemonade on the porch. He even helped fix the old greenhouse alongside her father. But after her father died, something shifted in Douglas. His warmth began to cool, slowly at first. He started spending more time at the office. He bought designer suits and began frequenting upscale bars for networking. He said the estate was draining them financially. He questioned every expense, every decision Virginia made regarding upkeep. He wasn't asking anymore. Then there were the missing things. A silver hairbrush from her grandmother's vanity, her father's favorite fountain pen, a set of antique cufflinks. Douglas said they were being appraised for insurance. Virginia wanted to believe him, but her gut told a different story. One she wasn't ready to admit. Yet. It was 2 months before her mother's latest health crisis when she found a folder tucked in the back of their filing cabinet. It contained receipts for a luxury condo in Rio de Janeiro, listed under Douglas's name, foreign bank transfer records, a secondary phone bill. That's when Virginia stopped denying the truth. She picked up the phone and called Juliana Reyes, a private investigator recommended by an old friend. Juliana was discreet, efficient, and precise. Within days, she had confirmed what Virginia had suspected. Douglas was not only having an affair with his young secretary Angela, but was also actively shopping the estate to potential buyers, using forged documents that claimed he had sole ownership. All the while, Virginia kept smiling. She brought tea to her mother in the mornings. She tended the roses in the garden. She coordinated with doctors about treatment options. But under that surface, a fire had begun to burn. A quiet, deliberate fire that would soon bring everything Douglas had built crashing down around him. He thought she was blind to his betrayal. What he didn't realize was that Virginia wasn't waiting to stop him. She was waiting for him to hang himself with his own rope. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a bitter chill in the air, and Virginia's phone buzzed before sunrise. It was the lead physician at St. Luke's Hospital. Her mother's condition had deteriorated rapidly. Emergency surgery was no longer optional. It was a matter of hours. Virginia barely had time to absorb the shock before dialing Douglas. The call rang twice before he picked up, his voice clicked and cold. "What is it now, Virginia? I'm in an important meeting." She didn't even react. "My mother's being prepped for surgery. I need you at the hospital." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Handle it yourself. I've got other priorities," he said, and hung up without another word. Virginia stared at her phone in disbelief. But it was the next message that froze her blood. Sold the estate. Leaving for Brazil tonight with someone who actually makes me happy. Goodbye." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply typed a single word in response. Fascinating. Hours passed in a blur of surgical updates and whispered conversations in the sterile waiting room. But while the nurses worked to save her mother, Virginia's mind replayed the images from Juliana's reports like a movie reel. Douglas and his secretary Angela, laughing over champagne at a rooftop restaurant, holding hands while jewelry shopping at Tiffany's, touring upscale real estate offices. In some of the photos, documents were visible. Papers, Virginia later confirmed, were forged property sale agreements. The financial trail was even more damning. Juliana had compiled weeks of transaction records. Douglas had been siphoning funds from their joint account, and even worse, from her personal account, quietly rerouting money into offshore holdings under fake company names. But that wasn't the worst of it. He had drawn up and signed fraudulent paperwork claiming he held sole authority over the estate. He'd used those fake documents to begin negotiations with a buyer, a man named Mr. Reynolds, who had no idea the deal was based on lies. But Douglas had miscalculated badly. Virginia had already frozen access to several accounts weeks ago. She'd quietly updated key legal protections and alerted the trust administrator. And tucked safely inside her late grandmother's diary, kept close at all times, were two priceless things: copies of Juliana's full report, and a tiny brass key, one that unlocked the estate's custom-installed security system. Long before her death, Virginia's grandmother had placed the entire estate in an irrevocable trust. Her foresight had been crystal clear: to protect the family legacy from greed, mismanagement, and yes, betrayal. That trust made it legally impossible for Douglas to sell or transfer any part of the estate without the administrator's explicit consent. No forged signature or slick lie could change that. As Virginia looked through the ICU glass at her mother lying unconscious, machines beeping steadily beside her, the last of her emotional numbness gave way to resolve. Douglas believed he had won. But he didn't realize the game was already over. And the trap? It was already sprung. Virginia sat beside her mother's hospital bed, her fingers gently tracing the edge of her grandmother's diary. The beep of monitors echoed in the room, steady but unnerving. Just then, her phone vibrated. It was Juliana. "Virginia," Juliana said, her voice low and urgent. "He's on the move. Douglas and Angela are heading to the airport tonight. They've already checked into the VIP lounge, celebrating like they've pulled off a masterstroke." Virginia closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and stood. "I think they've won," she replied, calm. "But they've forgotten who built this estate." Minutes later, she dialed Mr. Reynolds, the buyer Douglas had lured with promises of a quick deal. He answered cheerfully. "Mrs. Crawford, I was just about to finalize interior work permits. Quite a property. $3,200,000, 0 cents. Well spent." Mr. Reynolds yawned. Virginia interrupted. "Douglas Crawford does not have the authority to sell that estate. The property is protected by an irrevocable trust. Any attempt to sell it without authorization is fraud." There was silence. Then, a cautious, "I already wired the payment this morning." "Then I suggest you contact your bank immediately," Virginia said, her voice steady. "If you don't, you may become complicit in a federal crime." On the other end of the line, she heard papers rustling, then a sharp inhale. I'll call legal counsel, right now." Virginia hung up. Her next call was to Juliana. "I bought it, literally. We need to move fast." "I'm already on it," Juliana said. "I've compiled everything: Douglas's forged sale documents, wire transfer logs, account movements, and I forwarded the entire file to Agent Martinez at the FBI." "Has she responded?" Virginia asked, her grip tightening on the phone. "She's ready. Her team's at the airport." Virginia's eyes drifted to her mother's peaceful face, Then she opened the diary and removed the document at its core, the original trust agreement, signed and sealed years before Douglas ever entered their lives. It had held the estate safe from him all this time. Now, it would bring everything crashing down. A ping alerted her to a new text. It was from Douglas. Final papers dropped off. Enjoy the dust and memories. We're headed for real happiness. Virginia stared at the message for a moment, then typed her reply. You'll never find what you're looking for. She slipped the phone into her bag and looked up as Juliana entered the hospital room, a folder tucked under her arm. It held years of lies, now fully documented. We're ready, Juliana said quietly. The trap's set. Virginia gave a single nod. As far as Douglas knew, he was on his way to paradise. What he didn't know was that paradise would be replaced with a courtroom, a jumpsuit, and a name on a federal fraud indictment. All because he underestimated a legacy built by generations, and protected by a woman who refused to let greed win. At precisely 6:42 p.m., Douglas and Angela breezed through the front doors of Birmingham International Airport like they were stepping onto a red carpet. He wore a sharp custom suit, the same one Virginia had given him on their 10th anniversary. Angela clutched his arm, draped in a designer shawl and proudly wearing Virginia's sapphire heirloom necklace, an item missing from the estate since summer. They checked in at the international terminal, smiling, buzzing from champagne, full of the giddy energy that comes with stolen wealth and delusions of victory. Their first-class tickets to Rio were tucked safely in Douglas's inner pocket, along with forged financial statements, offshore wire instructions, and just enough fake credentials to bluff their way into a new life. What they didn't know was that across town, Virginia sat with Juliana in the hospital room, watching them on a live security feed streamed from Juliana's laptop. A second window showed the FBI agents already in position near Gate 12, joined by Mr. Harrison. The trust administrator, his briefcase full of original estate documentation. Juliana muted the hospital TV as the boarding announcement echoed from the laptop speakers. Final boarding call for Flight 322 to Rio de Janeiro. On screen, Douglas and Angela casually approached the gate, laughing at something. Angela took a selfie, pouting with exaggerated glamour. Douglas leaned in to kiss her cheek. That's when it happened. Two plainclothes FBI agents stepped forward, flanked by airport security. Mr. Harrison stood between them, calm and direct. Douglas Crawford, one of the agents asked. Douglas blinked, his smile faltering. Yes? I'm Agent Sarah Martinez. You're under investigation for real estate fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Douglas scoffed. There's been a mistake. My wife authorized the sale. I have documentation. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, voice crisp. The Crawford estate has been held in an irrevocable trust since 2003. Your wife couldn't authorize a sale even if she wanted to. Angela paled. Wait, what does that mean? It means, Mr. Harrison said evenly, that any funds received from the fraudulent sale are subject to immediate recall, and anyone aiding in the concealment of assets is a co-conspirator. Douglas's face twisted. You don't understand. Virginia, she gave me her consent. Mr. Harrison pulled out a folder and opened it calmly. This is her signed statement, and the trust agreement, neither of which gives you any power to act on behalf of the estate. Then Douglas did something no one expected. He shoved Angela forward into the agent's path and bolted toward the corridor. Hey, Angela yelped, stumbling in her heels. Security reacted instantly. Douglas barely made it 10 steps before two guards tackled him to the floor. His phone skittered across the polished terminal tiles. Angela turned, visibly shaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of this. Agent Martinez approached, lifting the pendant around Angela's neck. That necklace, this was reported missing from the Crawford estate. And these, she pointed to the folder Angela was clutching, documents with altered property records and banking details. Angla's hands trembled. Douglas gave them to me. I thought they were real. You'll have to explain that downtown, Agent Martinez replied. Back in the hospital room, Virginia watched quietly. Juliana paused the feed. You want to see the arrest footage again? She asked. Virginia shook her head. No, that's enough. She looked down at her mother's peaceful, sleeping face and reached for the diary in her lap. Douglas thought he had taken everything. Instead, he'd exposed himself to everyone, publicly, humiliatingly, and irrevocably. And now, the entire world would see him for what he truly was. Agent Martinez stayed behind after the arrest, seated beside Virginia in the hospital waiting room. Her expression was grave as she reviewed the evidence Juliana had gathered and what the FBI had pieced together over the past few weeks. She turned her laptop around, displaying a stream of documents and photographs tied to a growing number of victims. Your husband's fraud goes far beyond you and your mother, Martinez said, her tone low and steady. He's been targeting elderly families specifically during medical emergencies. He'd forge power of attorney documents while relatives were hospitalized or incapacitated. Your mother's condition was just his latest opportunity. Virginia folded her arms tightly. How many? 6 families, maybe more, in 3 different states. Juliana nodded. And Angela wasn't just a fling. She's been his accomplice from the beginning. She works for a shell company based in the Cayman Islands. It's been laundering the stolen funds for at least 2 years. Virginia closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the scale of it all. The man she had trusted for 15 years had turned fraud into a full-time profession, weaponizing illness and grief for financial gain. Martinez continued. There's something else. We checked the hospital records after you mentioned Douglas's involvement in your mother's insurance. She pulled up a digital file. He canceled her policy last week, claimed it was a cost-saving measure. Virginia's face didn't change. I know. I moved her to my own private policy 3 months ago. I'd seen the signs. He thought he was orchestrating the perfect financial collapse. Medical debt, an empty estate, no records. But I was 10 steps ahead. Martinez smiled faintly. Smart move. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden ping from Juliana's laptop. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she opened the estate's security feed. A grainy night vision image filled the screen. Angela, slipping through a back window into the study. She's going for the safe, Juliana murmured. You won't get far, Virginia said, opening her purse and pulling out her grandmother's worn leather diary. Inside its spine, a small brass key gleamed. My grandmother installed a secondary system that isn't on any blueprint. The estate is wired with motion sensors and UV trace mist that triggers the moment someone opens that safe without biometric clearance. On screen, Angela crouched in front of the safe. She typed in a code and twisted the handle. The moment the door swung open, the study lights flickered. The safe door slammed shut behind her with a loud metallic snap. Then came the hiss of the mist, nearly invisible, but deadly, precise. Angela jumped, coughing and waving her hands. She's marked now, Juliana said. That mist will cling to her skin and clothes for weeks under UV light. Virginia tilted her head, watching Angela stumble around the locked study in a panic. Grandmother always said, the best way to stop a thief is to let them lock themselves inside the vault. Martinez's phone buzzed again. We just intercepted a last-ditch attempt by Douglas. He tried to wire $500,000 from your mother's retirement account. Juliana looked up sharply. He must have scheduled it before his arrest. Virginia pulled up her banking app. Blocked. I moved all her assets into a secondary protected account last quarter. She's trying to steal from a vault that's already empty. The 3 women exchanged a long, loaded silence. Martinez finally broke it. He planned everything, but he didn't plan for you. Virginia nodded slowly, her voice calm. because he thought silence was weakness. He never realized it was strategy. Just then, the estate feed showed flashing red and blue lights outside the study windows. Local police had arrived. Officers opened the study door. Angela was curled up near the safe, her hands glowing faintly under UV light, surrounded by shredded documents and a broken pearl bracelet. Another stolen heirloom. Juliana closed her laptop with a soft click. That's one more chapter closed. Virginia tucked the key back into the diary. Not closed, just finally turned to the right page. Martinez leaned forward. We've got enough to charge them both on multiple counts: fraud, conspiracy, attempted grand theft. But more importantly, this saves other families from becoming victims. Virginia looked back at the hospital bed, where her mother slept peacefully. That's all I wanted. And for the first time in months, she felt something solid settle inside her chest. Not just justice, but peace. The morning after Angela's arrest, Juliana's laptop lit up with a new alert. An internal document from the construction firm Douglas had hired. It detailed plans to bulldoze the Crawford estate within 48 hours. Hidden in the fine print were forged environmental surveys and falsified structural reports claiming the home was unsalvageable. It was a lie, one designed to justify the demolition and fast-track permits. Virginia immediately called Mr. Reynolds, the would-be buyer. Did you know he submitted fraudulent surveys? He hesitated, then admitted Douglas had presented extensive paperwork, even paid bribes to expedite the approvals. But once Virginia shared the truth, he was stunned and furious. I've already halted all payments, he said grimly, and filed a fraud report with my bank. That man nearly dragged me into criminal charges. Meanwhile, the FBI searched Douglas's car, parked at the airport. Inside they found a sleek black duffel, 2 passports, stacks of foreign currency, multiple fake IDs, and something that made Virginia's stomach turn. A forged version of her grandmother's will, conveniently naming Douglas as the sole trustee of the estate. Virginia didn't flinch. She reached into her purse and removed the worn leather diary. Tucked inside, safe for decades, was the original, notarized will, clearly stating the estate belonged to the irrevocable family trust and could not be sold, transferred, or demolished under any circumstance. Agent Martinez accepted the document, her eyes sharp. With this, we'll get full search and seizure warrants. And they did. Over the next 72 hours, federal agents raided shell companies, reviewed property deeds, traced offshore transfers, and located hidden safe deposit boxes tied to Douglas. They recovered enough evidence to connect him and Angela to at least 12 families targeted across 3 states, mostly widows or those with elderly relatives in medical crisis. Douglas and Angela were arraigned in federal court within a week. The courthouse was packed. Journalists hovered outside. Inside, Virginia sat calmly in the front row, the diary resting in her lap like a silent witness to generations of wisdom and planning. The charges were read one by one. 37 counts of fraud, conspiracy, wire transfer violations, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. Angela looked pale, lips tight. Douglas tried to meet Virginia's gaze, but she didn't flinch. She simply held the diary a little tighter and looked past him, toward the judge. The prosecutor turned, holding up a thick evidence file. Your Honor, this was not a moment of bad judgment. This was a calculated pattern of deception, years in the making. The defendants preyed on the sick and the grieving, forging power of attorney documents, laundering funds, and attempting to erase historic family legacies for profit. Douglas's attorney weakly argued that his client had been misguided and emotionally stressed. The judge wasn't moved. Bail was denied. As Douglas was led away in cuffs, he turned back one last time, eyes locked on Virginia. His expression flickered between disbelief and rage. Virginia didn't move. She said nothing. There was no speech, no vindictive smile. She just stood, straightened her coat, and walked out of the courtroom with the diary in her arms. Some battles, she knew, weren't won with words. They were won with silence, strategy, and a legacy that could never be stolen. The months following the trial were quiet, but not idle. Virginia poured her energy into restoring the family estate to its former glory. The shattered windows were replaced, the roof mended, and the garden, her mother's pride, was replanted with fresh blooms. Surrounded by the warmth and familiarity of her childhood bedroom, filled with sunlight and soft memories. Every corner of the house whispered stories of resilience and history. Virginia made sure none of it would ever be lost again. But she didn't stop there. With help from the trust company and her grandmother's original advisors, Virginia began a new mission, teaching other families how to protect what mattered most. She hosted private consultations with widows, unsure of how to shield themselves from betrayal cloaked in love. She reviewed wills, updated estate plans, and explained irrevocable trusts in language anyone could understand. Juliana and Agent Martinez encouraged her to go public, to speak about what happened. Virginia declined every media interview. But when Stanford Law invited her to give a lecture on estate fraud and the intersection of trust law and ethics, she agreed. Just once. She stood behind the podium with her grandmother's diary in hand and spoke for 20 minutes. No script. Just truth. When she finished, the entire room stood in applause. Later that year, she quietly established the Eleanor Crawford Scholarship for Legal and Financial Literacy, named in honor of her grandmother. It provided funding for young women pursuing careers in estate law, financial planning, and elder protection services. The first recipient wrote Virginia a heartfelt letter, saying she hoped to be half as strong as the woman who turned betrayal into a blueprint for protection. Virginia also transformed the garden behind the estate. What was once her mother's sanctuary of roses and lavender now became a healing space, a quiet refuge for women rebuilding after betrayal, financial loss, or domestic abuse. They came from all over Birmingham, some referred by support groups, others by word of mouth. No press releases, no announcements, just a gate left open, and a path lined with rosemary and thyme. Douglas and Angela were no longer part of her life. Their names were never spoken within the walls of the estate again. What they tried to destroy had only grown stronger. The legacy they underestimated had become a beacon. Virginia knew the real victory wasn't just in outsmarting them, it was in what came next, in using her story to build something better, in making sure that what happened to her, what happened to her family, wouldn't happen to someone else. She didn't need revenge to be loud. She just needed it to last. The months following the trial were quiet, but not idle. Virginia poured her energy into restoring the family estate to its former glory. The shattered windows were replaced, the roof mended, and the garden, her mother's pride, was replanted with fresh blooms, surrounded by the warmth and familiarity of her childhood bedroom, filled with sunlight and soft memories. Every corner of the house whispered stories of resilience and history. Virginia made sure none of it would ever be lost again. But she didn't stop there. With help from the trust company and her grandmother's original advisors, Virginia began a new mission, teaching other families how to protect what mattered most. She hosted private consultations with widows, unsure of how to shield themselves from betrayal cloaked in love. She reviewed wills, updated estate plans, and explained irrevocable trusts in language anyone could understand. Juliana and Agent Martinez encouraged her to go public, to speak about what happened. Virginia declined every media interview. But when Stanford Law invited her to give a lecture on estate fraud and ethics, she agreed. Just once. She stood behind the podium with her grandmother's diary in hand and spoke for 20 minutes. No script, just truth. When she finished, the entire room stood in applause. Later that year, she quietly established the Eleanor Crawford Scholarship for Legal and Financial Literacy, named in honor of her grandmother. It provided funding for young women pursuing careers in estate law, financial protection services. The first recipient wrote Virginia a heartfelt letter, saying she hoped to be half as strong as the woman who turned betrayal into a blueprint for protection. Virginia also transformed the garden behind the estate. What was once her mother's sanctuary of roses and lavender now became a healing space, a quiet refuge for women rebuilding after betrayal, financial loss, or domestic abuse. They came from all over Birmingham, some referred by support groups, others by word of mouth. No press releases, no announcements, just a gate left open, and a path lined with rosemary and thyme. Douglas and Angela were no longer part of her life. Their names were never spoken within the walls of the estate again. What they'd tried to destroy had only grown stronger. The legacy they underestimated had become a beacon. Virginia knew the real victory wasn't just in outsmarting them. It was in what came next, in using her story to build something better, in making sure that what happened to her, what happened to her family, wouldn't happen to someone else. She didn't need revenge to be loud. She just needed it to last.